we've sort of borrowed that idea from other communities. And we think about, just as we would want, a high-speed internet and roads and railways and airports to function well, we also need our civic culture and our society to function. And again, one of the ways that businesses have been working to make that happen is encouraging their own employees to go out and vote and serve as poll workers and play an active role in the 2020 election. But we also, as businesses, think a lot about polarization and how the past few years have been quite difficult for a lot of people. And we've found ourselves in the workplace and families and elsewhere in a fairly polarized environment where people's opinions may cause them to no longer be welcome at Thanksgiving dinner, or your parents wouldn't want you to marry a Democrat or a Republican. And we feel that this increased level of polarization and acrimony is not a healthy ingredient to a successful workplace or to a productive society. And there are costs to a highly polarized environment, a political environment also. So what we wanted to do this afternoon was really have a conversation with you and encourage you to pose whatever questions you have in the chat function. Whenever something occurs to you, just write it in, and I'll do my best to integrate it into the conversation with our three panelists. And again, our focus is the business case for civic health, the business case for broad scale participation by citizens. So let me, with that, just quickly introduce our panelists. First is April Mims, and April is Vice President of Public Policy at Hims and Hers, where she oversees government relations and partnerships for all 50 states across the country. And Hims and Hers, as you may know, is an online healthcare service provider, particularly interested in equity-related issues. And April will tell you more about herself as we get going here. We also have Jesse Sneath. Jesse leads social innovation at Warby Parker. And a number of our panelists are wearing Warby Parker glasses today, which was not a requirement to being on this panel, but just so it happened. And Jesse has been very involved in Warby Parker's corporate social responsibility work, community-related work over the past 10 years. And we also have with us Surabhi Bhatt. Surabhi is a senior associate on the population health team at Oak Street Health. And Surabhi's company focuses also on providing healthcare services, particularly to underserved populations across the country. So again, for those of you who just joined, you're welcome to pose your questions in the chat, and we want to make this as interactive as we can. So as I noted, and April, let me start with you. There was a lot of work last year by many companies, thousands of companies seeking to engage their employees in the election, not in a partisan way, but in educating their employees about the opportunities to vote, to maybe serve as a poll worker. And so I wonder, starting with you, why your company felt that was important. How did that become your responsibility as a corporation?
Thanks for that question. And first of all, thank you, Richard, for inviting me to be a part of this panel. And thank you to Civic Health and the conferees for having me. This is such an important issue. In terms of being motivated, I'm going to be honest, it was a pretty easy sell for our organization. As Richard, as you pointed out, we are a telehealth and wellness platform. Some interesting things about us is that we're a cash-based platform. We also are direct to consumer. So you can find us online and connect with providers. And we also work on a number of stigmatized conditions like sexual health, reproductive health, behavioral health. And I say all that to say that sort of going against the grain is kind of part of our DNA. And so for us, when we feel like there's an issue to speak out about, it's something that we are very motivated to act on. And so I will say to answer your question first, getting motivated to do this, one, it was part of our values. The other thing I will say is I think the subtext of the word motivated, it would suggest that there are reasons not to do it. And I think that speaks to, Richard, what you were talking about before around, maybe concerns about not wanting to rock the boat, concerns about, will getting involved civically jeopardize my relationships with family members, friends, government officials. And so to that point, I think what motivated us is one, what you said, which is this particular issue of getting involved in voting issues, it felt like it transcended partisanship. It felt like it was something that we needed to do, and that it was foundational to our democracy to be a part of that process. And the other thing that I will say, and this isn't just because Richard is the host of the panel, but we felt like Business for America and some of the other organizations like Civic Health that were involved in this process and leading it, were so credible and trustworthy and sort of nonpartisan in nature that it made it very easy for us to follow and to say, this is a safe space for us to get involved. And so that was also what motivated us, is that we felt like we were meeting the moment, and we felt like we were doing it with a coalition of people who had the right, who were looking at this in the right way.
Great, thank you, April. We're going to return to those themes in a moment, but Surabhi, let me ask you, Oak Street Health works with a population, as you described, that is somewhat underserved, somewhat challenged with resources. And one of the things I've learned a good bit about over the past few months is this idea of social determinants of health, and that if I'm understanding it correctly, the more empowered a person feels about their own health, the more responsibility they may take, the more likely they are to participate in our society, and more empowered they feel. So how did you all look at this issue of civic health over the past year? And is there anything that April said that kind of resonates with you?
Yeah, and thank you. And I would totally echo April's sentiments, Richard, for first and foremost, leading such a thoughtful discussion, an extremely important one. So just to intro all of you that don't know who Oak Street Health is, we are a network of value-based primary care centers for adults on Medicare. And our core mission is really to rebuild healthcare as it should be. And our company does that by operating a pretty innovative healthcare model that focuses on providing quality care over just volume of services. And we assume full financial risk for our patients. We are proud to say that we are in over 13 states across the United States with over 80 centers. And to kind of answer your question and to kind of add into April's response regarding her organization, we very similarly to Hims and Hers, because of our central mission to rebuild healthcare as it should be. Our goal is always to provide care that is personal, accountable, but also most importantly, equitable. And so this last kind of notion of healthcare being equitable means that every person receives high quality primary care, no matter what their race is, no matter what their income is. And so reducing health disparities and inequity is, again, it's very similar, using a word which really resonated with me that April said, is really part of our company's DNA. And it's really important, the work that we do also.
Okay, great. And Jesse, Warby Parker, I know, has 105 or 110 stores around the country, 3,000.
130.
I'm sorry, how many now?
130.
130. Okay, great. 3,000 employees. And I know that you all really invested a lot last year, both in terms of encouraging your own employees to go out, be poll workers, making sure they knew how to read the ballot, what the issues were, but also partnering with a number of get out the vote organizations on the ground. So tell us a little bit about the thinking at Warby Parker and sort of the cultural piece of why leadership felt it was important to get involved in civic health.
Yeah, absolutely. And just wanted to send a big thanks to everybody for being here today and inviting me to participate on this panel. So Warby Parker was started about 11 years ago. We're an eyewear brand. We sell prescription glasses and sunglasses online and through our 130 retail locations throughout the country. And we have a really strong social mission. For every pair of glasses we sell, we distribute a pair to somebody in need. And that's really the cornerstone of our impact program. But civic engagement and civic participation has always been something that's really important to Warby Parker. But I think in 2020, that area had a new sense of urgency and focus and prioritization for us. And I think this was for a number of reasons. One really just being how consequential the presidential election really was, and how there was just so much at stake. But also the challenges of the pandemic and the challenges that the pandemic posed to a safe and accessible election. Barriers to voting is a concept that is not new, but I think the layer of the pandemic was something that we were all feeling really intimately. And as Richard mentioned, we're a national company with employees all over the country. We have a manufacturing facility in upstate New York. And so particularly around the pace in which legislation was changing around voter access and voter participation. And there was just so much information available to folks that we really took it upon ourselves to make sure that we were providing the source of truth when it comes to information at the state and local level for the upcoming election, and also ensuring that folks had the time and resources to participate if they so wanted to. So I would say like that really encouraged this kind of this new sense of focus. And I think since that, things have just been kind of full steam ahead with regards to how the business community can take action to continue to protect and safeguard the democratic process and really advocate for issues that we believe in.
Mm-hmm. And let me ask, was the inspiration for these activities, did it bubble up from the employee level, or was this a great idea that you and your colleagues at the more senior levels decided you would introduce, or a mixture?
Yeah, I would say it was definitely a mixture. And like my colleagues have said on this panel, I think like this idea of civic engagement is part of our culture. It's part of our DNA. It felt very natural and organic for us to take action in this space. And I think also our leadership really felt like it was their duty. And so this kind of mixture of it felt very us, this kind of sense of responsibility from our leadership team really kind of motivated us to take action. And while kind of dedicating resources and providing opportunities to our employees and customers and what have you, we in parallel path, continue to gather feedback from our employees to make sure that we were kind of prioritizing and focusing on things that they care about. And so whether that's, company-wide surveys or having informal kind of feedback sessions, because having an impact and doing right by our stakeholders is core to who we are as a business. And so making sure that our leadership direction is in line to what our employees are excited about and passionate about is really important. So again, to kind of answer your question, definitely a mixture of both.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. So Surabhi, was that the same, or April, was that, whomever would like to answer that? April, was that the same dynamic at Hims and Hers?
Yeah, I feel very aligned with what Jesse pointed out, which I hadn't, which is I think we can all recognize that certainly it's core to our DNA, but I think, Jesse, what you pointed out that's so instrumental is that 2020 was such a unique year, not only in the sense that we had this pandemic that pointed out this glaring spotlight on all the inequities in our healthcare system and just really our economic system in general, But we also had sort of the social justice movement, the racial reckoning, all of these things happening in the background that I think we would be remiss to not mention influenced, even if it was just in our subconscious, the decision of, our various companies to get involved. I don't want to speak for them, but it was, I think, certainly a part of the discussion that was happening at Hims and Hers. The other thing that I sort of aligned with was the idea that the community and our larger employee base was also a part of this decision-making process. I was listening to an NPR piece recently with Jeff Sonnerfield from Yale, and he was talking about how he had brought together all of these business leaders, high-powered CEOs to talk about the importance of civic engagement around, voter suppression. And I thought this was a very interesting quote. He said, they just don't want angry communities and finger-pointing workforces and hostile shareholders. It makes their job tougher. They want a harmonious, honest society. And I think that really speaks to, Richard, what you were pointing out about just how acrimonious this environment has become. You can't go on Facebook or Twitter without having a fight. And I think on a corporate level, our leaders, our CEOs are saying, we have a responsibility here through our civic engagement, through the way that we interact with the public, to play a leadership role in showing how you should engage to create integrity and to advocate in a way that is that shows integrity and is value-based and is honest and sincere. So I think that's part of it as well.
Right. And I'm Surabhi, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I cannot agree more with both what Jesse and April are saying. And similarly at Oak Street, we had a very strong directive and commitment from our senior leadership and our executive team to ensure that not only was Oak Street an anti-racist and inclusive organization, but that we used our voice as healthcare providers for underinvested and marginalized communities to reduce health disparities and inequity. And just like April said, this sort of commitment and support was echoed from teammates across our organization that were really excited to jump in and help however they could. And one thing that always makes me think about, what was sort of the impetus that drove us as an organization to do this work. And one of the things is, I consider our organization as almost taking this collective Hippocratic oath to advocate for the best interest of our patients by supporting and caring for their health needs, but then also improving their health outcomes and quality of life. And we believe at Oak Street Health that civic engagement and civic health is a core part of our care model.
And I'm curious, Surabhi, just to build on that, what do you have examples of customer client response? Did everyone welcome the company's involvement, or were some people saying, well, why are you talking to me about voting? It's really not your responsibility. That's a personal choice.
That's a great question. Yeah, we were lucky in that we received a pretty overwhelmingly positive response from our patients. So one of the initiatives that we undertook in the 2020 general election was via SMS texting service, shared Vot-ER's registration links with all of our patients and said, hey, if you're interested, use this link to get registered to vote. And we had over 1,000 patients in just under 2 months that got registered using that. So there was an overwhelming sort of appetite for that. And then that sort of sentiment was also similarly echoed in our staff. So what a lot of our staff did was they would talk with our doctors or would talk with our social workers and say, hey, I know this Vot-ER badge that you keep walking around wearing it, what is it? Give me more information. So that really sparked some internal dialogue as well. And then there was a lot of strategic communication that came out from, a lot of our senior leadership, including medical leadership and our COO, that really helped kind of advance this internally as well.
And what could give us an example of the types of conversations that might have been prompted by the badge you were wearing?
Yeah, that's a great question. For staff, it was normally positive because I think they had an understanding that this was sort of an internal initiative that we had taken on. So they at least had context. A lot of patients, similar to what Dr. Martin was sharing at the beginning of the conference this morning, is when patients see a physician with a badge, they assume it's one of their ID badges. And so a lot of times they'll be like, that's not your ID badge. What is that? So it at least sparked that curiosity. And then the doctors would start that conversation by saying, well, let me that was perfect segue into what I was going to talk to you about, which is voting. There were some patients that often we're ambivalent based on what I've talked with some of our medical leadership. But most of the times patients were at least receptive to hearing what the physician had to say. And I think that was really kind of driven by the level of trust that exists between our providers and our patients. The patients trusted when their doctor said, hey, this is something you should really think about. If you're not registered, think about getting registered to vote. And this is why this is important, not only for your own well-being, but then also for the well-being of your community as a whole.
Right. And this idea of trust, Jesse, let me ask you this next question. It's been really interesting to see public opinion polling data pointing out that the business community in the United States is among the most trusted institutions, much more so than the media, more so than government, maybe even a little bit more than the military. So that's, a blessing and maybe a challenge. But as Warby Parker thinks about, serving your customers and being a responsible participant in society, did you experience any challenges in being so out there last year and continually being involved in these civic health initiatives?
Yeah, I would say something that was really top of mind for us in this space was really focusing on our kind of core competencies and where we had the most, where we had expertise and strength. And so when I say that, I mean, it's similar to, it sounds like the Oak Street Health experience. We had in our stores, we had QR code, like window clings, where customers could check to see if they're registered to vote. And, some customers engaged, and it was a really nice visual cue for our retail associates to respond and have a conversation about registering to vote or the election or what have you. But if folks didn't want to, then no pressure, they could go along with their shopping experience and try on glasses and no mention of the election if they didn't want to. And so I think that really aligns with also how we think about our impact work at Warby Parker. First and foremost, we're a fashion brand. We sell beautiful glasses at an affordable price and a kind of an easy and fun shopping experience. And then kind of like the third or fourth thing you learn about us is we have this strong social mission, and that might be a key driver for some customers to come to us and become a repeat customer, or maybe you tell your friend about us. But for some customers, it's not the number one reason, and it's not driving you to us, and that's okay. And so I think we really acknowledge that. Whereas on the flip side with our employees, I would say 90% of our employees come to Warby Parker because of our social mission. And so our employees are not only some of our biggest brand ambassadors, they're also our biggest accountability partners. And so it's the way we kind of message and share opportunities and resources with our employees is really different than how we think about our customers. And again, we're okay with that distinction. I would say one last piece is last year all of our department leaders reached out to all of our top vendors and really tried to kind of lean on the purchasing power that we have to say, hey, this is something that we believe in at Warby Parker. This is something that's good for democracy. This is good for business, and this is how we're thinking about civic engagement, and not in a way to try to shame or what have you other organizations, but just kind of share our perspective with partners that we might not have typically shared this information with. And the response there has been overwhelmingly positive, and people were really receptive to kind of sharing our civic engagement playbook and how we thought about paid time off to vote and what have you. So that was a really interesting kind of new engagement for us last year that we'll definitely kind of think through how else we can kind of leverage those partnerships in the future.
Right, because I hear there's another election coming up in 22, right?
What?
Yes.
We have to do this again?
Yes, at least. April, let me ask you a question here that someone has posed, which sort of builds on this broader theme of from whence does the motivation and the inspiration to take action come from? So, there are examples where employees, in junior level, people have prompted the leadership of a company to take action, right? And then there are other instances that I know of where the top CEO has felt very passionate about an issue, and he or she just went ahead and did it, but didn't necessarily ask the government relations people or the communications team what the process would be. So the question is, what lessons might be learned from encouraging leadership to take action and having to maybe convince them and make a case, an economic case, a business case, a patient care case. So can you offer any insight from hims and hers perspective on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I am a VP at Hims and Hers, but I am not part of the C-suite. And I'm not interacting with shareholders on a regular basis. But with respect to Hims and Hers, this was something that was definitely being talked at the C-suite level, but it was also, there was a lot of conversation amongst the staff about why this was important. So, we actually, per your suggestion, came at this from a very business-oriented perspective. We did all of the things that you do with respect to kind of building internal coalition around an issue, 101. We had conversations amongst other departments as a GR team, trying to gather, information about why on the comms team would this make sense for us to get involved? Why does it make sense from a marketing perspective? Well, hell, why does it make sense from a product perspective? There's an argument there as well. And so once we had that buy-in internally, it made sense for us to draft a more formal memo and sort of make that business case. Is there, an opportunity in terms of building our brand, being able to show leadership on issues? Is there data around like the benefits of civic engagement to building your brand or helping employees feel more valued and empowered? All of that information can be useful as you're making the case for why this is important to leadership. The other thing I think that's important for us to remember is that a lot of times when there is movement on these issues externally, we see a lot of companies that want to use the black box, or they want to make a pithy statement about the importance of being involved in social justice or civic engagement issues. And that is critical, for a company to be able to take that stance. But I also think it's important for us as staff to remind our leadership in a very respectful, deferential way that we have to follow through on those statements. And so I think that can be very useful internally when you're having those arguments, discussions, debates, conversations, is to remind your leadership, you made this statement publicly, and the public and your community and your employees are going to expect you to act on it now.
Right. And I think that's very important point, because, one of the criticisms that a number of companies who've signed on to somewhat generic letters recently supporting voting rights, that the critique is, well, what are you going to do now? What more might you do? And how will you ensure it's not just checking the box? Surabhi, is there anything you can tell us about how Oak Street Health grappled with that issue? And, since you're a healthcare provider, it doesn't sound like you had to convince senior management per se, but maybe for institutions that might be more conservative, they might be located in a part of the country where voting has become a very partisan issue, where people are still maybe relitigating last year's election. So any advice on how to navigate those waters?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, definitely. I think all three of us are, all three panelists are very lucky in that we work with organizations where there was such great alignment between, leadership and then, as April, you said, the rest of the company. And what I would recommend if you are in sort of a area where maybe this is a more contentious issue, or in an organization where this is more of a contentious issue, I would really just tie this back to, some component of your core mission or to your business strategy, and really kind of making the case. And maybe just, I know all senior leadership loves data. I'm a big data person. So I always advocate for perhaps, demonstrating in one area of your organization how this could potentially make an impact. So if you're in a healthcare organization, for instance, how this could have an impact on improving a certain patient group's outcomes, and then using the data generated from that to deploy across the org, and if a company has existing D&I goals, I think that is what Oak Street did also, is, how can we tie already existing D&I goals to the civic engagement work that we do? And then I think championship is important, right? Having local executive physician champions, if you're a healthcare organization, that can help support this work, so that the individual or individuals that are advocating for this with leadership don't, have this sort of unanimous support to create, something that works for everyone.
It makes sense.
Don't you also feel like, per our earlier conversation, it's about your approach? So I heard Sarabi and Jesse both say that, it was really a subtle but also very poignant way in which they were reaching out to patients or customers, of, having the lantern around your neck, or, having something posted on the wall. This isn't sort of lobbying, trying to really beat something down someone's throat. It's a suggestion. It's engaging that person, and the person has the choice, and they are empowered to say, no, I don't want to be involved in this way. And that's fine. And so I think because we as corporations or health entities have that built-in trust and political capital, it's a safer space for us to make those suggestions, and people can choose to act or they can choose not to, but they should appreciate the fact that just as we offer different products and they can take them or leaving, or different services, this is another thing that you can choose to do. And we have a responsibility to offer you that option of being engaged.
Yeah, Jesse?
Yeah, I think just to layer on that, the concept of social impact and the concept of civic engagement, it's not just one thing. It can mean so many different things for different businesses and companies. And I think that, on a personal level, I find comfort in that, because you can really kind of pick opportunities or ways to take action that make sense for your stakeholders and your business. And so thinking about, ways to engage your customers or your employees. You don't have to do both if it doesn't make sense, or ways you can use your voice and brand platform that can take so many different forms. And so I think that for other kind of businesses and health institutions, kind of thinking about how to get involved and figuring out ways that make sense for your business, know that there's not one path and there's no one right way, and there's really there's different kind of approaches and ways to think about taking action and having impact.
Right. There's a question here that I'd welcome each of you to weigh in on, and it's suggesting that that given that a number of workplaces have become polarizing environments, where the arguments around the proverbial water cooler have become more fraught than they might have been several years ago, maybe the best strategy is not to say anything, right? So that's one approach. But I think the person writing this question is not endorsing that approach, but asking, what are some ways to engage constructively, to talk about polarization, maybe really call it out, and to by calling it out, making it safer to express a variety of opinions. And I'll give you just two quick examples to reflect on. I was talking to the CEO of a manufacturing company a few weeks ago, and he said, during the Black Lives Matter movement last summer, he wrote a note acknowledging the importance of Black Lives Matter, and he felt really good about it, and he got congratulated by some employees, but others wrote back saying, well, what about Blue Lives Matter? Why are you ignoring that as an important factor in our society? Another government relations director of a pharmaceutical company recently told me that, like most companies, we have an operation in New York and Massachusetts and liberal California, but we also work in Indiana and South Carolina. So we're sort of laying low because we don't want to stir up the passions. So there are, clearly different approaches here. And then finally, we've heard a lot over the past several weeks, Senator Mitch McConnell talking about woke capitalists, Senator Rick Scott, also criticizing companies for taking stands on these issues. So it's a, unsettled terrain. And I wonder if any of you would like to weigh in on sort of how to deal with the fact that, not everyone in the company shares your political views. How do you navigate that?
I'll definitely quickly share from Oak Street's perspective. I mean, given that we're now in 13 states with 80 centers, we are definitely in areas of the country that are more blue than red or red than blue, so we are really serving a very, very diverse set of patients that come from all different political inclinations. And so I think one of the key things that, and I think this touches upon something that April and Jesse both said earlier, which is that inherent trust that is built between a patient and their provider that can help push past some of those sort of uncomfortable conversations or difference in opinion, if you will, and really help kind of find that common ground. And that is something that I saw our providers, our social workers kind of do over and over in the last election. Because as we know, again, our last election, along with the events of last year, really made a lot of people really back into their two corners, and want to stay there a while, and really not want to come to the middle and have this like often uncomfortable dialogue. Right. And so I think that is sort of one of the key places where we can say, okay, can we at least try to come somewhere halfway in the middle so we can talk about some of these elements and find that commonality that ties both of us together as individuals.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. April or Jesse, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, I think Surabhi spoke so well to the kind of external politics. In terms of the internal conversations happening with employees, I think it's important to position the conversation the way that you would position anything that you're advocating for. So there are controversial issues outside of voting laws that happen within a company, whether it's, should we promote this product? Should we promote this service, right? Cultural issues, all of those issues. How do you structure a conversation in that space? The same thing can be applied here. Do you put 150 people on a Zoom without having any conversations beforehand and say go with no moderation and no structure? No, that's a recipe for disaster where you're not going to come out with any clear deliverables or action. Or do you tailor specific conversations with groups, recognizing probably their position that they might be coming from? And like you said, Surabhi, think about what is the thing that all of these groups have in common that we can align on. Tailor the conversation so that everyone's muted when they need to be muted, or create a channel. Maybe it's an anonymous box where people can submit the questions that they don't feel comfortable raising in a forum of 200 people. Whatever those tools that your company or system is using to be productive and getting complex issues through the process can be applied here, so that you don't end up in a situation where we burn the place down due to all of this friction. But the goal is to build consensus.
Right. And I'm hearing you say that's really important to have a deliberative process that may take weeks to develop, and you need buy-in from within the organization, right?
Right. I mean, I guess if we're working towards 2022, let's start that process now.
Right.
And have those deliberations internally, in our respective teams and then sub teams, and we can build out from there so that we're building that consensus and ready and organized. Because I always feel every election season like I'm running behind. I can't believe this got here so quickly. And so I'm just gonna make a note to myself to be much more deliberative this time around too.
Good. I will remind you as well. Jesse, good. Jesse, what are your thoughts on this topic? But because Warby Parker has a fairly public presence, and you need to be deliberative about when you engage. And there's also, as we've seen, the potential for blowback. Some companies have really had a hard time over the past weeks because they stepped out and spoke out about a particular issue.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think especially what April just said, it really resonates with how we think about complex challenges and building consensus and alignment. I mean, a lot of this work is emotional and it feels like the right thing to do, but we can't let ourselves just lean on that. We really need to make sure we're using our kind of decision-making framework and kind of due diligence criteria that we would evaluate any other business opportunity and apply it to this, these types of opportunities. And I think for us, especially really pushing ourselves to say, like, why are we doing this? Why does this make sense? You know, do we have a history of taking action like this? Is this where we want to go in the future? Like making sure it's not just like a reactive one-off decision, and really making sure we're kind of aligning it to other goals that we have and have already been communicated. We spend a ton of time really over communicating to our internal workforces, so everybody understands why we're doing what we're doing, how we're doing it, like how folks can engage with it, and just really spending a lot of time there so that again, our employees feel excited, but also understand these kind of big public facing decisions that we're making. And so even small things like, you know, we recently signed on to a letter with fair elections in Texas. And so reaching out to our Texas team kind of first to say, hey, this is something we're doing in Texas that we know is going to impact you directly, and this is why we're doing it. And then maybe sharing it more broadly with folks or what have you. But so really, again, to reiterate what April said, kind of leaning on processes and decision-making frameworks that we have in place and applying it to these types of decisions and opportunities allows us to take action and move forward and do things that we're really excited and proud about.
Okay, good. So Ruby, let me go back to a question that was asked about, do you know of any hospitals where doctors, nurses, et cetera, were told they could not wear the Vot-ER badge? You know, for any number of reasons. Maybe people felt it was stepping into an issue area that wasn't the purview of the facility. So do you know of those kinds of examples?
Oh, I'm frankly surprised to hear that there was such strong pushback that providers weren't allowed to wear that. I'm not personally aware, and I'd be curious if April, you or Jesse are too. I'm not aware personally of any healthcare organizations that either I've previously worked at before or ones that have been covered in the media that have strictly allowed their employees not to wear those badges. In fact, I've seen more healthcare organizations sign on to this than not.
Okay. And Janet, who asked the question, if you know of examples, we would be happy to hear of those. You know, it may be that given that voting rights has become a very partisan issue and a lot of difference of opinion about what's necessary, and if there's really a problem in the first place with people having equal access to the ballot, I could imagine in some places in the country, this could be, you know, wearing such a badge, encouraging people to participate could be seen as a partisan initiative. So,
yeah, and
I think this is, oh,
sorry, April. I was just going to add like one quick thing where I was saying that I think that's where partners like Vot-ER and Business for America are really vital for this work, because again, emphasizing the like sort of nonpartisanship of the work that we do, that, hey, and that was something that we did at Oak Street early on when we communicated this to our patients and to our staff, is to say, hey, we're not telling you to vote for one particular party. We just want you to vote. We want you to understand the importance of voting and then get somebody else registered to vote. How you vote, who you vote for is really your own personal choice. It's not something we want to dictate.
Right. Yeah. April, did you want to add to that?
No, I think this is a theme here. We keep going to that foundation of trust. And I think the business community is uniquely in a place there where we are seen as not being someone that compels you to do something. So there might be perspectives that government, Congress, other institutions compel you to do things. They thrust things on you. They don't give you an opportunity to be involved in that process. I think the unique sort of like aspect that the business community is able to bring is that it's a business interaction. You can take it or leave it. You can come into the store, you can leave the store. You can go online, you can leave online. Everything is a suggestion. Do you want this product? No, that's fine. Do you want this service? No, that's fine. Would you like to register to vote? No, I don't want to. Okay, that's fine. But offering products, offering that opportunity, offering that engagement, it feels like that's something that is in line with our values. And it's also something that I would think someone would expect when you're going into a marketplace. You have these decisions to make. And I think if we frame it as it's a decision, you're empowered to take it or leave it, that can help allay some of these concerns about people feeling like these particular initiatives are being forced on them.
Right, right. April, you're in a fairly regulated industry, right? So, there's federal regulation governing what you can sell and say online, I suspect, and there's state regulation. So for hospitals and the healthcare industry, also having to abide by all these rules, is this a concern of yours that, the company could sometimes find itself in hot water by getting involved in civic health related issues?
I don't think so. Well, what I would say is for Hims and Hers, I think we've been pretty clear about what our mission is and our brand is. For example, 2 months ago, we launched a telehealth equity coalition where we brought together, hundreds of different providers, health systems, different organizations to think about equity in the healthcare system and the fact that there are these longstanding disparities, and think about ways in which we can tackle things like the digital divide, provider diversity. So that's something that we are a co-founder of that coalition. We've been very intentional about promoting it and trying to get more energy around it. And then we've also done things like we supported the California Black Caucus this past session when they were looking to push a number of pieces of legislation to tackle sort of systemic racism. So if you've looked at our feed, it's probably no surprise that we're also interested in voter engagement. I think, from my perspective, it helps when our leadership is really invested in a particular mission and values, because as an ambassador for the program, when I am in a state where perhaps that's not their value system, I can say, it's the CEO, it's not me, like, this is just who they are. But at the same time, we're talking about this particular industry, this particular product, and the policy is the policy, and that is separate from the values of a specific company. And so I almost think it helps when your company is very clear and explicit about where they are on an issue, because no one's going to be surprised. Look at our news feed. I am a member of this organization, but I'm here to talk to you about a policy issue. We're on the record for this particular issue. You know it. And, I think as long as you stick to the policy, you can get around some of those other concerns about, repercussions.
Good. Jesse, do you want to say anything about, maybe some advice you might have to the healthcare professionals and people in that industry from what you've learned, from having all these retail outfits in many states? Is there some set of lessons that you think are applicable in the healthcare industry?
I mean, I'm really encouraged by what my panelists or co-panelists are saying about this sense of this trust that they're really seeing between kind of patient and provider dynamics. And I think that that's something that we employ a lot of opticians and optometrists, and it's something that is definitely top of mind. But I think it's interesting for us to continue to kind of leverage and lean on when thinking about how to really support various communities. And so I'm really encouraged by that. I think from a kind of super high level, this momentum around businesses and healthcare institutions kind of taking action and employees and customers are starting to really look to companies and expect them to do it, that this momentum that we're all part of, I think is personally like super energizing. And I think that, you know, folks like yourself, Richard, of Business for America, being able to help kind of galvanize and direct and support businesses in this space is so critical, because I feel like 2020 we had a year, but 2021 is not slowing down. And so I'm just feeling really optimistic and excited by the momentum in this space, because I think that we can affect real change. And I think it's a great responsibility, but I think there's a lot of impact we all can have.
Right. Thank you. Yeah.
And I completely want to echo what Jesse, what you said, Jesse, really resonated with me as well, is this element of like, it is sort of, eventually, I hope we can get to this point, and at least I remain optimistic in the healthcare world, that physicians and healthcare organizations will see this kind of an inherent part of the care that they provide to their patients, where it'll kind of become this like, why wouldn't we care about your civic health? Just like we care about, you know, controlling your diabetes or your blood pressure or what have you. So I'm really optimistic that as sort of leadership kind of becomes more conscious around these, a lot of social justice movements that are happening as well, but kind of take that kind of broader lens in the type of care we provide. I hope that, you know, we can evolve to a place where this will just become just a key part of everything we do.
Business as usual.
Right, in the
There you
future.
go.
Yes. April, did you want to add on to that?
No, I feel like I almost feel like we should summarize with what you just said, Sarabi, but I'll just add something more specific to that, a finer point, because I was thinking about the question around sort of perceived partisanship. And I think if you want it to be really tactical, one of the things that you could do that I've done in the past is, if you as an organization are supporting something that could be perceived as left-wing, just do something on the right to balance it out. So, you know, as an organization, yes, we care about making sure that people are fulfilling their civic duty and they are empowered and understand the voting process. We also care about getting access to telehealth in rural communities and communities that perhaps aren't as aligned on that particular issue. And we're focused on putting money, resources, volunteer manpower into that as well. So you can be holistic in that way too, to sort of provide that counter. So that's not as lofty. I'm hoping, like Sarabi said, that this issue is transcending that partisanship, but you know, maybe as an extra belt and suspenders, you could do that as well.
Right. Okay, good. Well, we have just a few more minutes here. Are there any other questions from the listeners that you'd like the panel to address? Okay, so
Richard,
yeah, Jesse, go ahead.
I have a question for you.
Please.
So you work with so many different businesses and so many different states and geographies. And I think, like, you know, we had such an unusual year last year, and would be curious to hear from your perspective, what was something that was really surprising that you saw in maybe a positive way, or maybe a not so positive way, but maybe, you know, something that the business community did to really inspire?
Well, one quick example comes to mind. We ran a program called Operation Vote Safe, in which we mobilized 50, 60 companies from a diverse set of industries to donate PPE to election workers and, in some cases, voters. Worked in about 28 states, as well as a number of Native communities in the Southwest, American Indian communities. And, you know, on the one hand, companies sort of shook their head and said, why is it that we're donating PPE to the public sector? You know, I thought they had their act together. But on the other hand, they felt very empowered and gratified to be able to be of such service. And so I think that motivated a lot of companies to step up this year and not be cowed, not be intimidated by some of the political blowback that they've received. And, you know, maybe one thing that I still have been surprised by is some companies that have signed on to generic, we care about voting rights type letters have been reluctant to associate themselves with a particular piece of legislation. And, you know, and I understand why, in part because those companies may not be experts in election law. You know, the bill's still being drafted, but I think we're seeing an evolution in the business community where more companies are going to become comfortable in speaking up about the overall importance of voting rights and civic engagement. And the other thing I'll just quickly note is, you know, this is not a right-left divide. There are, you know, conservative companies and there are progressive companies that have simultaneously determined that citizen engagement and a fair and accessible and safe election is important for everybody.
And Richard, to your point, I know I recall with respect to the PPE, because Hims and Hers was one of the companies that did donate PPE.
Yes, thank you.
We were actually involved in some nice discussions with some purple and red states who appreciated the fact that we were donating PPE. So I think sometimes we're very quick to judge that something's partisan, and this can be partisan, let's be clear, but it's not always that way, especially when you have folks like Business for America as sort of the folks that are kind of leading that charge, and they have such a good reputation that you're able to bring people to the table that normally you would not be able to, and sort of bridge that divide.
Yeah, exactly, because we feel really strongly at Business for America that, you know, a key part of the solution and, you know, returning to a more sanity is less polarization, you know, better communication, better listening. And, you know, I think as all three of you have indicated, you know, a willingness to understand another person's point of view. And that essentially is what, you know, a democracy doesn't mean you're winning all the time, you know. So, Surabhi, would you like to offer any final thoughts here?
Oh boy, that's tough shoes to fill and tough to follow after such a great session. Yeah, for organizations that are trying to do this type of work, I saw a question in the chat come through, so I'll kind of tackle that. And Richard, your question as well. Organizations that are perhaps looking to get any type of civic engagement work underway, I would recommend start small, but, you know, work to see how you can build something in a part of your organization that you can tie to your mission, tie to something you're already doing, and then build from that. You know, it's never too late to start. I know based on all of our findings from last year, we are now engaged in a full, robust strategy that's going to be deployed across our organization. It's going to be a key part of what we continue to do. So continue to have some of those difficult conversations. And like April said earlier, you know, make sure you have some of those targeted conversations and then listen when people give you feedback and, you know, create this loop back into like what you ultimately build and deploy across the org. So I think those are kind of my final recommendations for people looking to move forward with this work.
Good. Those are very helpful. April, any final thoughts from you?
I was going to say, kind of tongue in cheek, just remind your company what they tweeted or wrote on LinkedIn last year and how they need to follow through on that. But more constructively, I agree with Surabhi. Start small. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. You know, we feel like we left some stuff on the table this past election cycle, but we did something, and that's something that we should be proud of. So it doesn't have to be perfect. But I disagree with the premise that if you can't do it perfectly, you shouldn't engage at all.
Thank you. Good. And Jesse?
I guess one small little addition is celebrate what you've accomplished, even if it's small, even if it doesn't feel so consequential. I mean, I think just recognizing what your business has done or what your employees or customers have done and acknowledging it is so important. So I would take time to do that.
Great. Well, thank all three of you so much for a really interesting conversation. I really appreciate your insights and time. And to the attendees, we really thank you for your involvement. And if you have questions about any of this, I think you'll be able to find our emails easily through the program agenda. And Business for America is interested in working with any of your facilities across the country on these issues of nonpartisan work and reducing polarization. Let me just remind everybody that